Well, it's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be here today. Thank you guys for joining this session. I'm here with, I work with the Wild Foundation. As I said, I'm the facilitator of the North American Intergovernmental Committee on Cooperation for Wilderness and Protected Areas Conservation. There'll be a quiz on that acronym later. Often it sounds like NACA for some of those folks here in Fish and Wildlife Service. But NAPA committee is the committee that I facilitate, and I also manage conservation programs for the Wild Foundation. I'm here today with a colleague, Hanna Öllös from Austria. She's joining us from Austria, and she's with the European Wilderness Society. Before I invite Hanna to introduce herself, I just wanted to say that, the intention we're here today, I'm going to try to go through some slides relatively quickly in the first 10 minutes so that I can hand over to Hanna and she can give us she has a presentation on some wilderness perspectives from Europe. That's very interesting, and so be able to give her some more time. So if I go through slides too quickly, just please let me know, or let me know in the chat, or you can inform me with the emojis to slow down, and that will all be very helpful. So I would like to invite Hanna to introduce herself today and share a little bit about your background.
Thank you very much, Adam. Welcome everybody. Good morning there. It's afternoon here, but I'm still prepared with my coffee. My name is Hanna. I'm from originally from Slovakia, but I work in Austria in the European Wilderness Society. And my plan and intention for this coffee hour is to kind of go down a little bit, like revisit the journey of wilderness in Europe, the history and the current and the future of wilderness here. Thank you.
Thanks, Hanna. So here we go. I'm going to dive in. So what brought me here today? Well, as part of the Wild Foundation has been at the heart of a global wilderness movement for over 40 years. So the Wilderness Foundation was started in South Africa between an African tribal leader, Zulu leader, and a white game ranger that came together to protect the white rhino. But they soon recognized that wildlife was not the real problem, and rather it was that people needed to have a change of heart and needed to experience the health and beauty of wilderness. And this way they could improve their own lives and work to protect healthy and wild nature for all people. So the Wild Foundation, here we go. I'm trying to move myself forward here. There we go. So working for wilderness and wildlife and people, our values, just to touch base on those, is integrity, respect, and community. Integrity in all interactions with nature and people and everything else will follow. And respect is at the root of all sustainable solutions. And the need for nature crosses all borders. So does the need for each other. And so we value collaboration across cultures, races, nations, and professions. And we honor the importance of culture, language, art, community, and communications. So WILD is part of an alliance, a global alliance under Wilderness Foundation Global. These are somewhat sister organizations. They all have their background in South Africa, with the two founding gentlemen, Ian Player and Matumbo. So the Wilderness Foundation Africa is based in Durban, Wilderness Foundation UK, and Wilderness Leadership School. So all of these organizations have a common heritage and a common vision of what can be achieved working together. Basically a direct importance to human health, well-being, and inspiration. So the Wild Foundation, what I work for, is based in Boulder, Colorado. We're the US branch. And basically, Vance Martin is the president of Wild Foundation, and he was a mentor to Ian Player and Matumbo back in the day. And when they decided that Vance would move to the United States, and all these other mentors, such as Andrew Muir and Wilderness Foundation Africa, would be based in Durban. Vance took on the responsibilities of the program of the World Wilderness Congress. So the World Wilderness Congress is the original flagship program for the Wild Foundation. It's the longest running international public conservation program. The purpose and intention for the Congress is to build awareness and support for wilderness and strengthen wilderness policy from grassroots decision making to national policy. Um, since the beginning of the World Wilderness Congress, it has given rise to international community that places the protection of wild nature front and center before world leaders. This has occurred 10 times in the last 4 decades, and some of the practical outcomes include pioneering true partnering between global conservation and traditional and indigenous communities, initiating the process that would lead to the World Bank's Global Environmental Facility, establishing dozens of new public and private protected areas covering millions of acres of land, multilateral efforts to restore and protect wilderness across national boundaries, numerous new organizations to address new and urgent needs to conservation community communications, regional protected areas, global policy issues. And it also launched Nature Needs Half, the global vision and practice to protect and restore half of wild nature on land and sea, the necessary human-nature relationship called for by both contemporary and traditional science. So as an outcome of one of the World Wilderness Congresses, the European Wilderness Society was formed after Salmaca in Spain. And so Hanna will touch base a little bit that on her presentation, but that's our relationship with the Wilderness Society in Europe. And just to kind of give you a foundation of the rich history the Wild Foundation has in wilderness efforts throughout the globe. So through all of these discussions, like I said, the Wild Foundation is working with governments and private sectors, global institutions, indigenous communities to create a diverse knowledge base of international wilderness and law and policy. And so today, really cruising through a lot of our information, but I wanted to kind of touch base on some of the resources and products that are out there for land managers, wilderness stewards, at your disposal. So if you can take a screenshot at any time, so you can follow up on any of this later, that might be helpful. So as an outcome from the World Wilderness Congress, there's several products and just this rich history that Wild has facilitating collaborations, and there's several valuable resources. One would be the Handbook on International Wilderness Law and Policy over here. And if you can't see my cursor, there we go. It's translated in Spanish and French. There's a Protected Wild Nature on Native Lands, which is a series produced through the Native Lands and Wilderness Council. And these case studies highlight Indigenous peoples' strategies for coexisting with and managing their wild lands and seas, and are practical and spiritual examples of how to live in harmony with wild nature. Also, wilderness management, stewardship, and protection of wilderness resources and values. The recent edition is the 4th edition by John Hendy, a longtime trustee and friend of Wild Foundation, and Chad Dawson. There's also a bunch of other publications at that link, and all the material is able to download for free. There's all the plenary sessions from the World Wilderness Congresses are there. For those of you on the call from some of the federal agencies that have institutional subscriptions to one of these resources, the International Journal of the Wilderness, I just wanted to share with you that you can sign up for notifications. We will not crowd your inbox. It'll happen 3 times a year, and it'll just let you know when a new issue is released. and there'll be a password so that you have free access as your agency contributes to an institutional subscription. So the last World Wilderness Congress was scheduled for 2020 in Jaipur, India, and unfortunately, due to the coronavirus, it was postponed. And at this time, we don't anticipate being able to reschedule in India, but um, it's not confirmed or official. What the next World Wilderness Congress will look like is uncertain, but we are seeking some options, and there is interest that has been expressed from several countries in hosting the next one. Even though the event was postponed, there were several of outcomes which are on the website, again, wild11.org. But one which I'd like to touch base on today is a global charter for rewilding the earth. And so it's a valuable tool that I won't go into too much detail about, but it has been a resource that has been drawn attention from the Decade of Restoration movement, and we have developed an alliance as a partner organization with the Decade of Restoration called the Rewilding, the Global Alliance for Rewilding. So this movement involves thus far 125 member organizations who've signed on to the Global Charter for Rewilding and its values and principles, and 35,000 NGO partners dedicated to stabilizing the climate emergency, halting extinction, and reducing the likelihood of new disease outbreaks by rewilding the earth. So please check out rewildingglobal.org for more information on this alliance. And there's an upcoming event that I highly recommend. The Wild Foundation is hosting it. We're looking forward to panel speakers, several very distinguished guests, Carl Burkhardt from One Earth, Russell Mittenmeyer, from Global Wildlife Conversation, Oswald Schmitz, the Yale School of Environment, Stephen Lutz, Environment and Grid Arundel, and Christine Tompkins from Tompkins Conservation, and Melina Sakayama, a co-founder of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, will be on a panel discussion. Got all those names in there, and it'll be a celebration to launch the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration, and present a conversation between globally renowned experts, as I mentioned, on the relationship between nature and climate and the promise of rewilding as a method of solving the climate emergency. So one other product from that I want to touch base with is what I facilitated in the NAPA committee as an outcome of the World Wilderness Congress was an MOU signed across North American land management agencies that was to work on protected areas and wilderness conservation lands together. And the core of the MOU is fostering the exchange of ideas, experiences, best practices, and innovative solutions on shared conservation opportunities. Now you see the logos of the North American agencies that are members or participants of the committee, with CONOP in the Commission of Natural Protected Areas in Mexico, Parks Canada in Canada, Fish and Wildlife Service, DOI agencies, Fish and Wildlife Service, National Park Service, Bureau of Land Management, and the Department of Agriculture Forest Service, with partner organization U.S. Geological Survey. So this partnership was formed in 2009 during Wild 9. And since then, there's been several products. I won't go have a whole presentation on NAPA, but I want to just dive in and share a couple of the products that Hanna can have some more time here. So we have a Conservation North America, an analysis of land-based conservation in Canada, Mexico, and the United States by NAPA agencies. Again, you can learn more at napacommittee.org. And there's a few other products focusing on grasslands and valuing our ecosystem services as nature-based solutions. I just wanted, I included this so that I could mention that we have a recent NAPA effort that will be going into publication in the near future, a report on working with Indigenous peoples for the conservation and interpretation of natural and cultural heritage. The document will illustrate a diversity of approaches to working with Indigenous organizations for the protection, conservation, presentation, and interpretation of natural and cultural heritage. It's a series of stories and case studies from all of these agencies that share a wide diversity of approaches to working with Indigenous groups and organizations in the management and presentation protected in North America. So that's, I'm trying to really cruise through everything here. The last slide that'll be a segue into Hanna's discussion is Wild Foundation has several other initiatives in which I did not mention. Well, I encourage you to visit our website. We work with youth. We have a program in Mali that protects the last remaining desert elephant herd in Mali. And one of the Vance Martin, the president of the Wild Foundation, is also the founder and co-chair of the Wilderness Specialist Group at the International Union for Conservation of Nature. Through that role, he's facilitated and supported the development of the Wilderness Protected Areas Management Guidelines for IUCN Category 1B. If you haven't had an opportunity to read through this resource, I highly recommend taking a snapshot. And I will pass this over to Hanna. Just from this perspective, this is kind of just touching base on the movement of wilderness as protected areas, and kind of from 1964 with the Wilderness Act being developed in the United States to wilderness areas being registered with IUCN Category 1B from 1992 on, through this definition that's mentioned on the slide. And in 1992, Finland defining wilderness, and then the European Commission in 2012. In the last that I checked in 2016, wilderness was used in 70 countries, 3,000 different areas, and many more unregistered under the USA Wilderness Act. So, or excuse me, many more unregistered. So with that, I know that there may be some questions. I please ask them in the chat, and we'll get to them after Hanna's presentation. And I will hand it over to you, Hanna. Here we go. Stop sharing. There we go. Cruising. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much, Adam. I hope you see my screen. Everything is fine now. Has been almost a year and a half, so we are experts in Zoom. Okay, so I would like to thank you again for the Wild Foundation for inviting us to present here. It was also a great honor to welcome them. Vance attended our International Wilderness Week last year, which was the first global wilderness conference that we organized, and it was really a great pleasure to have the Wild Foundation there on board, and also now to be able to host this coffee hour together. The title of my presentation is there really wilderness left in Europe? In this presentation, I also would like to be quick, but I would like to ask you to, while I'm presenting, maybe you can already use the chat box to formulate your questions. And if we have time, then definitely we'll address them directly, or of course, you can always get in contact with us, and it would be a pleasure to discuss anything that comes up further after this. So I would like to talk a little bit about the history of wilderness in Europe, the definitions, how they were formed, the certification system that exists, IUCN, as Adam mentioned, and of course, the European Wilderness Quality Standard and Audit System, which the European Wilderness Society developed. And then as kind of a summary to compare what we've learned in these last 10, 20 minutes, how a European wilderness can be compared to the US wilderness, what are the similarities and differences in the two definitions. So the question is, when you think of Europe, what really comes to your mind? It's usually not really images about nature, it's usually images like this. Of course, beautiful culture, would like to travel to Paris, then from there to Berlin, then visit Rome, but it's not really a common thing to highlight wilderness in Europe or nature in Europe. The continent with such a large human population, it must have little to no wilderness. So is there really any wilderness left? And if so, how does it really look like in Europe? One may think that it's maybe some nice forests, some nice mountains, but I would like to show you a couple of pictures of our wilderness areas that we have certified, which showcase the variety of wilderness that exists here in Europe. There is riverine habitats and beautiful forest habitats close to the Arctic Circle. In Finland, Ålanka wilderness, but we can also showcase some of the high alpine wilderness areas in Austria, where I'm based. Definitely we should mention old growth forests, let's say in Ukraine or Romania, which are untouched or very the old growth and basically have not been modified by humans for a long time, as well as Soma wilderness in Estonia, beautiful peat bog areas. And there are plenty of others. And this is, for example, a photo of the Königsbrücker Heide wilderness in Germany, which may seem like a standard natural area that doesn't really include a lot of human settlements. But if you look into the history of this wilderness area, we can actually see that this large conservation area was in fact once a military training ground. And this has not been actively managed for more than 15 years, which allows the visitor to have a unique experience of and to see natural spontaneous dynamics and how non-intervention management can allow nature to take back an area. So as you can see, this is really the vast variety of wilderness that exists in Europe. This demonstrates how European wilderness varies and how we cannot really think of such wilderness sizes that are in America, and we have to take many factors into consideration, but we do have a lot of wilderness here. Another example to showcase how natural processes develop in Europe is the example of the wolf. With its large cities and modern infrastructure and intensive agriculture, Europe really doesn't seem like a place for large carnivore comeback. You may know that due to the history of hunting and persecution, by the first half of the 20th century, basically, the gray wolf had completely disappeared from most of Western European countries. However, what we've experienced is that not just the wolf, but also the brown bear, the lynx, the wolverine, the golden jackal, and many herbivores are expanding their range now. In many areas of Europe, they are surviving and they are increasing, not just in the protected areas, but outside the protected areas. And this comeback really shows that this amazing resilience of these animals, that these populations are returning in really a human-dominated landscape. To compare really what we are seeing and experiencing here in Europe, basically the human population in the EU is double the size of US, and we do in fact have 17,000 wolves currently roaming within Europe, and we experienced 30% annual increase. With such highly inhabited area, this is only possible due to these wild animals living and getting used to human-dominated landscapes, which is a very interesting experience for us to monitor. One example for this is basically a snapshot of one area in Germany, which you can see there are plenty of villages and towns, and there are some roads, also even gravel pits, so definitely a highly urbanized area. I would like to ask you, maybe write it in the chat or just think about it, whether this would really be an area for a wolf or a wolf pack, and if so, how many could inhabit such an area? I would definitely, or the common person would not say that there would be any wolves here. But in fact, last year's data shows that just this area hosts more than 40 wolf packs in Germany, and all across Germany there were 128 wolf packs last year. We do in Europe have, and especially in Germany, have basically names for all of our wolves and monitor all the wolf packs. We are very proud of them and we are very proud to follow their expansion. So it is really an extremely interesting process to see that this wildlife is coming back. Of course, not without human conflict following it. So that's, of course, a completely different topic, but we are happy to have them. So with this kind of base to see how the highly urbanized Europe can still host wilderness and wildlife, it is also important to kind of mention the main milestones for wilderness and the history of wilderness in Europe. While there is a common European wilderness definition that I will show later, many Europeans might not really even now have a clear idea what wilderness really means, what characterizes wilderness. Here in Europe, of course, we have several languages. The word wilderness has a negative connotation in many of them. It is often perceived as something chaotic, something messy. Wild is not really a positive word. On the other hand, wilderness can be seen as a place where people do not intervene with nature, where natural processes can take over and natural developments. And therefore, wilderness in Europe and its definition and certification and stewardship raise numerous questions even now. As Adam mentioned, of course, the Wilderness Act in 1964 was a milestone, not just for the US, but it started a process also in Europe as well. We took a bit of time, but in 1992, the FFH directive was passed. And this was really the first moment, even before the EU existed, when actually the Birds and Habitat Directive were established and wilderness was first mentioned and the protection of wilderness. Then there were several other milestones. Wilderness protection was also referred to in the EU biodiversity strategy, and it was connected to forests first. So basically preserving wilderness areas meant in that EU biodiversity strategy, preserving forests, old growth forests. What a definitely big milestone for the history of wilderness was the EU wilderness, basically the wilderness resolution that was passed in 2009, which was started by the Wild Europe Initiative. And this was the first moment where the European Parliament defined that wilderness has to be protected, that wilderness should be mapped, and that there should be a common strategy developed for the protection and preservation of wilderness. Fast forward 5 years, many people, experts from all across the globe gathered on the 10th World Wilderness Congress. in Salamanca, just as we saw from the presentation of Adam. And there were many wild conservationists, and this moment sparked the foundation of the European Wilderness Society. And for the last 5 years, it took basically 5 years until 2013 for this moment. And then it was defined that it's not just enough to formulate what is wilderness and maybe formulate a wilderness definition, but it's also important that we have to live it, that governments and organizations have to actually implement it. And this is what really triggered in 2014 then the foundation of the European Wilderness Society. Rob Leslie nicely summarized what then the European Parliament also finally formulated as valuable, what we are aiming for when we talk about wilderness. On the left side, we see the urban places, the intensive use, and then the more we move to the right side, the closer we come to wilderness. And we also see in this very nice picture where rewilding is in this process. So rewilding is the process to come closer to wild land and then wilderness, basically. Wilderness with non-intervention, non-extraction, and open-ended, natural and undefined process. In 2013, after Salamanca, the Wilderness Working Group also formulated officially the wilderness definition that we use even until now. So what is the wilderness definition? These wilderness areas are governed by open-ended, undefined natural processes. They are composed of native habitats and species large enough for the effective ecological functioning of natural processes. And they are undefined, unmodified, or only slightly modified without intrusive or extractive human activity, settlement, infrastructure, or visual disturbance. That's what we consider wilderness. And this is why also the Königsbrücker Heide wilderness, which I showed you, this formerly a military area, completely classifies as wilderness because it's an open-ended, undefined natural process. So this means that in European wilderness, there is no hunting, no logging activity, no mineral connections, no mining, not even basically forest fire intervention, no control of any kind of disease or alien species, and no restoration measures. This is really a natural dynamic process, and whichever direction it will go there. It does not include human intervention. There was a definition formulated for wild areas as well, which is basically also a very close to wilderness area with a high level of predominance of natural processes and natural habitats. This is often partially modified by past human activities such as grazing, hunting, and fishing, but this is still basically a direction towards wilderness. There are in Europe 2 certification systems to certify wilderness. One is the IUCN Protected Area categories that Adam already presented. So in these categories, you see there are 6. Category A is split into 2. There is a strict nature reserve and there is the wilderness area, and 1B, the wilderness area, is what IUCN defined as wilderness. Basically, the 2 IUCN categories mainly differ in the size. So the 1B areas are mostly larger in the as the 1A areas. So what is important to highlight about the IUCN categories, I'm really running out of time, is that these are really mostly located in Northern Europe. And what concerns Europe is that there are so many factors that with the IUCN certification, it lies in the hands of national governments And depending on how important the government rates nature protection, in particular the protection of untouched and wilderness-like areas, a lot of effort can be put into the establishment of wilderness areas or not. So the European Wilderness Society was formed in 2014 to develop a network of European wilderness and to develop a quality standard for European wilderness that can be used all across Europe. You will see there is also a link in the bottom of my slide. You will come across a lot of different information on our website, so I encourage all of you to visit our website. We are the only pan-European wilderness and environmental advocacy nonprofit organization. We have a dedicated multicultural team. I'm from Slovakia. We have colleagues from the Netherlands, from the UK, from Latvia, from Spain, basically all across Europe, not just biologists, ecologists, but basically experts in all different fields. What connects us is that we want to protect European wilderness. And our mission is to identify, designate, steward, and promote European wilderness, mainly wild rivers, wild coasts, wild islands, wild forests. These are categories that are developed to make it easier to audit these wilderness areas and to be able to tailor different recommendations according to the areas themselves. We have a European Wilderness Network. At the end of my presentation, there is also a link to the website as well. There are more than 40 audited wilderness areas in 14 countries right now in our network, and there are many wilderness candidates. The objective we have is that by 2025, we will be able to have at least 500,000 hectares of certified wilderness in Europe. And we aspire to have 1 million by 2035. As I mentioned before, we have developed the European Wilderness Quality Standard and Audit System. It is also available and published on our website. It includes 10 principles and 57 criteria and 130 indicators to be able to assess and evaluate the quality of wilderness, wilderness stewardship, and many other tourism impact, research and monitoring in these wilderness areas. Where we are at the moment is that we are expanding the European Wilderness Network, of course, but it's not only our only mission. We are also focused on bringing art and wilderness together through our Wild Art initiative, which brings artists to wilderness and inspire and encourage them to be inspired by nature. We also have a training academy, the Vlado Vančura Wilderness Academy, where we organize online and offline trainings, ranger trainings, waste management trainings, and many more all across Europe. Also working together with the US Forest Service, mainly in the Ukraine. And we are also working on a policy paper to finally bring wilderness into the EU legislative process and connect, find linkages between wilderness and current and future EU nature strategies. There are some pictures that you see here. This is the team in action. Unfortunately, in the last year and a half, we weren't able to travel a lot, but we have many plans to visit the wilderness candidates that we have, and also the existing wilderness areas that we have in the network. And just as really a summary at the end, and I hope I will still make it in time, kind of a comparison of wilderness in Europe and in the US. The definition itself is also a bit different. So we in Europe talk about unmodified or slightly modified areas without intrusive and extractive human activity. In the US, you have this, which I really like, this area which is untrammeled by man, where man himself is a visitor who does not remain. But what we experienced in Europe is that our wilderness is really an open-ended, undefined natural process. If some species will disappear, they should disappear. It's a natural process, and nature should define what the direction of that process is, not humans. Of course, there are other differences as well. in the size, European wilderness is likely much smaller than American wilderness. The protection status, unfortunately, in Europe, there is no legal embedding protection status for wilderness. So the IUCN protection status is really voluntary. There is no legal embedding. And also the EWS, we are doing our best to, and we have also already succeeded to embed our audit into, 55. Okay. Okay, so we have an International Wilderness Week later this year, and I will. This is very strict.
Yes.
So I will just switch to my last slide, because all the information that I didn't manage to say is available on our website and on the European Wilderness Network. I encourage you to make a screenshot of this slide, and regarding any kind of question, just contact us on these below email addresses.
Well done, Hanna. Thank you everybody for joining. And there were a few questions in the chat, and please do reach out to us individually for future questions, and do read about Hanna's bio on the website. She's got a lot of wonderful experience, and she's a great person to connect with.